very honored to introduce Deborah Meyerson and Steve Zuckerman. Deb was, until her stroke in 2010, a tenured professor of organizational behavior at Stanford University's School of Education. Deborah's most significant contribution from that period was Tempered Radicals: How Everyday Leaders Inspire Change at Work. Most recently, she authored Identity Theft: Rediscovering Ourselves After Stroke, and is co-founder and co-chair with her husband, Steve Zuckerman, of Stroke Onward, a nonprofit working to ensure stroke survivors and their supporters have the resources needed to rebuild identities and rewarding lives. Steve Zuckerman, along with his wife, Deborah Meyerson, co-founder and co-chair of Stroke Onward, he's been Deborah's care partner since her stroke in 2010. He's held leadership roles at Self-Help, a nationally recognized economic justice nonprofit, since 2006, and still serves part-time as a senior advisor there. Before that, he was a managing director at a private equity firm. In the summer of 2022, Deb and Steve led Stroke Across America, a 100-day cross-country bike ride from Oregon to Boston to raise awareness for stroke, aphasia, and the importance of the emotional journey and recovery. I was fortunate enough to get to know them a little bit last summer when they stopped in Missoula as one of their Stroke Onward stops.
Hi, everybody. I'm really happy to be here.
And just have to say that we're thrilled to be following the last presentation, and we have to spend some time together.
Yeah.
What you talked about resonates, and if it was couples therapy, we'd sign up.
Let's get started the short exercise. Who are you? How do you describe yourself? Pair up with someone near you. First is it take the 30 seconds to describe each other.
So apologies to those who are on Zoom. We didn't organize to create breakout rooms, but we understand some of you may be watching with colleagues. So if you can, and here in this room, find somebody next to you, ideally somebody you don't know, but if you do, that's fine. And just take 30 seconds to say who you are. Describe yourself. So this is a real-time exercise. We need to see people moving. So how did you describe yourself? Did you focus on what you do, how you act, what you care most about? We find a lot of people usually start that discussion with what they do and their primary roles. But what you said, do you think your best friend would have said the same thing? Your spouse, your partner, your kids? And if you were here 10 years ago doing that exercise, or for some of you 25 and for some of us 50, would you have said the same thing? You're up.
In 2009, I was a professor at Stanford. I encouraged students to explore topics like gender, race, and identity. And in 2010, I had a severe stroke. Robbed me of all robbed me of the right side. All speech. I had to relearn how to walk, how to make a sound, how to say my name. My stroke took so much of me: independence, control, my career, and so much more. But to me, I was the same person. So I had to get my capabilities back. The 3 years, I worked my ass off. The hardest job I ever had. With all this work, I still didn't regain all my capabilities. I couldn't be a Stanford professor anymore. My aphasia didn't let me do the job. So 3 years after my stroke, I lost tenure. This is a huge blow. What is I do now? Who am I now? My identity crisis began. I struggled, really struggled. I didn't know what to do. I still felt like an academic. I wanted to be academic, but I lost my job at Stanford. The bad news, I was holding on to my old identity. I looking at my past work I can no longer do. The good news makes me look at the book I wrote in 2001, Tempered Radicals. Identity is the big part of my this story. I knew I wrote identity. I studied at school. I researched and wrote about it. I taught students about it. But here I am struggling with my own identity. So I decided to write a book about this. Writing identity theft was so hard, really hard. It took me 5 years, and I learned to accept lots of help. It became my learning journey. It helped me rebuild my own identity. No one told me rebuilding the identity is so important. Over 5 years, it's really and so important.
So, is this one on? Yep, there we go. So just to talk a little bit more about identity theft, because it really was, it took, and sometimes I say, with nobody telling us, and that's why I'm so interested in all the conversation about what is the process and what do people get after that acute care. Nobody told us to think about this, and yet it took all of Deb's background and a 5-year book writing process for us to even begin to figure it out for ourselves. And that really is striking in terms of a gap in the system. But a little bit more about the book. From the very beginning, and in fact, Deb fired the first publisher because his mindset was, oh, this is going to be a great memoir. She didn't want to write a memoir. She wanted to bring a lot of other people's stories into the book because it was really important to us that this be accessible to a lot of people. And we often use the expression, if you've met one stroke survivor, you've met one stroke survivor. And so we knew a book just about our experiences wouldn't feel accessible to a lot of people, and so wanted to bring more in. So Deb, with help, interviewed 25 other survivors, another 35 family members, care partners, professional caregivers, so that there was a lot of different experiences brought out in the book. I won't take the time to tell the stories of these 3 particular people that were interviewed for the book. But just to say, and I mean, you can look at their pictures and know that they're very different people. They bring different personal backgrounds, race, ethnicity to their experience. Their strokes were anywhere from when they were 29 years old to in their 50s, so all relatively young, but very different.
14.
Yeah, we did interview none of these 3, but there was one of the people we interviewed who had a stroke at 14, and we interviewed people who had strokes well into their 70s. So they were very different. And yet, all 25 had certain similarities. One was that they all worked incredibly hard, and not just for 6 to 12 months, which is often the period of, you all know the trope that fortunately is a little less popular today than it was 13 years ago when we started hearing it, but we're strong advocates to try to break that notion that recovery happens in a year, and Deb's still doing therapy today, 13 years later, and still improving. So, and everybody we interviewed had that experience. They also had the same experience that Deb did, which is none were offered any significant help with the emotional journey in recovery. Guessing most of you have somewhere along the way seen Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This was developed not to describe stroke survivors or people with disabilities. This was developed to try to explain what motivates people, all people. And as Deb was writing the book, she kind of latched on to this and realized that I was operating up toward the top of this pyramid as an academic, trying to create knowledge, help people, and my stroke knocked me all the way to the bottom. But once she was stable medically, once she started recovering her basic needs, she realized there's no reason I can't climb back up this pyramid. And that was kind of a light bulb for us in terms of how we wanted to view the process of stroke recovery. The last talk obviously plays to this. We took this expression when we saw it when we did an intensive aphasia program out at Shirley Ryan Ability Lab. They led a family session with stroke as a family illness. And if anybody in the room has read the book, if you haven't, if you want a good cry, go to chapter 9. It's the story of our daughter giving a talk when she was a senior in high school about how she personally changed, and not just her life changed, her identity changed. And so that's one of the things we talk a lot about, is that for the family members, it's not just that our lives change, but we change, and we should go through that same identity journey. Deb talked about how important understanding identity was, and how much it was at the core of her and our emotional journey. So Deb mentioned she had to give up her faculty position, but she hasn't stopped being a professor, so I introduce you to Professor Deb.
The identity is the narrative about ourselves over time. We have not one static identity. our identities are complicated. We have multiple identities. I had to remember that I'm more than a job at Stanford. I'm a mother, wife, daughter, friend, teacher. I love biking, not skiing.
Deb broke her hip skiing 2 months ago.
Walking, sailing. I had to think about all the things that makes me me. Identities change. We are changing all the time. Right before the stroke, I was not the same person I was 4 years before, or 10 years before, or 9 years before. My stroke changed me faster, but I am changing anyway. The identity is a social construct. We are who we are in this context of relationships. My relationships, my friends, family, and colleagues are a big part of making me me. Most important, identity is the choice. Instead of asking who I am now, ask
Go for it.
who do we want to be now? Stroke forced me to slow down. I had to choose how to think about this future. Your sense of self, your identity is strongly affected by your situation, your race, gender, social status, and more.
So it turns out that 5 years of work to write a book didn't get us to the finish line. It got us to the starting line. And we decided that this issue that we kept running up against while we were writing the book of people not getting any guidance on this emotional journey and how hard it was for us to discover it ourselves, really said, hey, there's a gap in the system. There really aren't a lot of people out there talking about it, and we may be uniquely positioned, given our backgrounds and our personal experience, to do something about it. So we created a nonprofit called Stroke Onward, really to do this work and to continue the work that got started during the process of writing the book. Won't spend a lot of time talking about Stroke Onward. You can read the mission. Really, our vision is that the stroke system of care for survivors in the future fully supports every survivor's emotional journey and recovery. And it's pretty aspirational, and we don't know how we're going to make little nicks in the system to get it there, but that's what we hope to do. Kind of our strategy, and that's not supposed to be there yet, sorry about that. There really are three things that we're focused on at the moment. One is raising awareness, and you know, if there's a gap, you got to make sure people understand there's a gap. Fortunately, after 2 years of work, I think more of our awareness-raising activities are actually part of our programmatic work like this. And one of the big things we've done, thank you to the American Stroke Association, we write a column, I never know if it's bi-monthly or semi-monthly, but every 2 months, column for their Stroke Connection newsletter and website. And it gives us an opportunity to share with a broader audience than we have ourselves. We'll talk a little bit more about some of our awareness-raising activities. Creating and sharing resources. It's one thing for people to say, yes, this is a need, and I see this need, but then what do you give them, and who do you send them to? And there was some talk about the shortage of resources, and certainly in the emotional health arena, there's a shortage of resources. So we hope to be able to help create and share resources. But it's really all about changing the healthcare system. And so all of our work is really trying to build a foundation, as we said about the vision, so that the system really has, when we say the system, some of that is the formal system, the hospitals, the rehab centers, but then all the nonprofits, all the university programs. What is the total support system for people with stroke? Not just, and you used the phrase chronic condition, not just during the acute care, but for that chronic condition that most stroke survivors, we would argue all stroke survivors, because they've gone through a life-changing event, have, and what support do they have? So moving back to raising awareness, and Kathy kind of gave a little preamble about a little trip we did last summer, and Deb's gonna start that off.
And thank you, Kathy. Stroke Across America was the bike ride across the U.S. and Canada to raise awareness about stroke, brain injury, and aphasia. We rode 4,500 miles over 100 days from Oregon to Boston. We wanted to spotlight the emotional journey after stroke. How do we rebuild our identities and live meaningful lives? We hosted 16 community events across the country. They brought together survivors, families, friends, care professionals, and more. It's so inspiring to do this, building the community and collaborating with others is the only path to real change. We had a core team of 6 riders and others who joined us the portions of the ride. We became a family. I didn't expect that.
So just a little bit more on our team. This picture, well, hopefully it looks better from where you are than looking up at it here. So to Deb's left, a young woman leaning down with the black helmet, that's Whitney Hardy. Whitney's a very, very close family friend who was hit by a car about 5 years after graduating from college and suffered traumatic brain injury. She fortunately doesn't have physical disabilities, but still struggles with some cognitive issues, memory issues. And she was just an absolute trooper and really used this ride to help her push herself in her recovery to rebuilding her life. Standing up in the back, a black gentleman, Michael Obel Omia, is also a stroke survivor. He Unfortunately, he missed the first 15 days of the ride because his son was graduating from college, an event he wouldn't miss. Michael also suffers from aphasia, and it was very interesting because I went into the trip thinking I understood aphasia pretty well given Deb's experience. Michael has a very different, or his aphasia manifests itself very differently. He's got fluent aphasia, so he speaks very fluently, but what comes out isn't always what he means. He also has a little bit of receptive aphasia. So riding a bike and asking him to move to the right so he was a little further out of traffic and him not understanding that instruction, it took me about 2 weeks to really understand his experience of aphasia. So that was a huge lesson for us. Michael is an amazing survivor, amazing person. And then to Deb's right, 2 young women stooping down were 2 interns that we were able to recruit for the trip. They were both students at University of Washington, St. Louis. They alternated. One rode, one drove each day. The other one, who was driving, was working. And they really helped us with a lot of our event organizing and our social media and other forms of publicity. And they just brought an amazing young energy, positivity to the trip that we can honestly say, and when you talk about socializing and choosing who you want to spend time with, who gives you energy when you need energy, they totally changed the dynamic of the trip, and it would have been a different trip had they not been on it. So it was just a great example of how who you involve matters. Deb mentioned that we had arranged it, the folks, and big shout out to Montana here, a group called Bike Eternity and a gentleman named Arlen Hall in Missoula did all the road organizing for us and all the logistics on the road. He and his wife run that small company. And we did have a wonderful event in Montana. Yeah. Mentioned that we had people join us along the way. Yeah. We had arranged 3 weeks where people could come and do a fully supported bike trip with us. One of those started in Missoula. We also had a virtual ride where organizations around the country could put teams together who could do whatever activity they wanted to do and track their progress against our progress. And then we had a program, about half the days we rode, we publicized our route and talked to local organizations, bike clubs, stroke support organizations, to have people come out and ride with us just for a part of a day. And we named that the Ride with Rusty program, which lets us introduce the last member of our team. And that was our then about 18-month-old, now almost 2.5-year-old Golden Doodle. She was, as we said, the queen of emotional support, ready with a hug and a cuddle for anybody who needed it. In the spirit of a picture is worth 1,000 words, we hope this, if it works, a video is worth even more than that. And let's see if it works.
How to kill all mosquitoes in the area in 90 seconds. This simple but brilliant trick you can do tonight to eliminate all mosquitoes around.
Skip ads.
Yeah.
There we go. Is the sound not working? Okay, so we didn't do it for sound. Okay.
How do you go from a professor who teaches about creating change and using your voice as an athlete to somebody who's disabled fully on your right side?
I'll step back. I'll let you do it. No,
beforehand.
I am Deb Meyerson. 2010, I had this severe stroke.
I'll grab it and go back to the beginning. Okay.
Tell me, the man of Steve and Deborah, the cyclists, you are loved. Cycling across America, 4,300 miles.
This initiative, this project takes advocacy and awareness to a national level of awareness.
So we're 50 miles into a 76-mile day.
How do you go from a professor who teaches about creating change and using your voice and an athlete to somebody who's disabled fully on your right side and can't speak? And how do you reconcile that with how you saw yourself beforehand?
I am Deb Meyerson. 2010, I had this severe stroke.
We're climbing. We're climbing. Do, 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 do. Stroke Onward is about raising awareness around the importance of the emotional journey of rebuilding identity, and that is a critical part of the recovery process. But we decided very early on that we wanted to have a broader purpose to the trip to make it more relevant to more people, more easily accessible to more people. And so we really structured it around raising awareness for stroke, for aphasia, which is very poorly understood in the United States, and the importance of the emotional journey and rebuilding identity.
My name is Maggie Whittam, and I had a stroke 7.5 years ago.
Doctors told me wheelchair for life and no talking. I believed them. 4 long years.
It is a loss of the ability to communicate. It is not a loss of intellect. And that is so important for people to understand. And unfortunately, that's not how people are treated.
I don't want this trip to end.
Two rules. 1, never quit. 2, never quit.
To think about what's next.
And just so you know, that dancing in the rain picture has become kind of our metaphor for life, that we have to find ways to dance in the rain. Okay, so really the community events, I mean, we love the riding. I'd wanted to ride cross country since I was 22. It was a blast, but the community events really were the highlight. And Kathy, you probably recognize a couple of those pictures because we found ones that we could pull in from Missoula. We just learned so much talking to survivors, care partners, professional caregivers. And then Deb and I, needless to say, over 4,500 miles with our heads about 12 inches apart. We had a lot of time to think and a lot of time to talk. And that really gave us a chance to think a lot. You saw Deb in the video saying, what's next? That wasn't even at the end of the trip. So if you want to know, she's a type A personality. We had a lot of time to talk about what really did we want the focus of our work to be. And there were some things we learned. Okay, I guess this was an older version of the presentation. Just last week on the American Heart Association website, the most recent of our columns went up, And it really was our trying to encapsulate the message that we've been developing over the last 2 years about the need for more emotional support in recovery, for mental health support in recovery, and how that might work, and kind of issuing a little bit of a call to action to others to join us in this journey to try to create more support for the emotional journey. So far, we've been focused on a few things. We've been working with a lot of colleagues in the stroke care system about how to get more counseling skills into all the disciplines through the training programs, through continuing education. We're on a constituent advisory board for an NIH-backed study that's trying to train speech therapists with a certain form of therapy skills. We're also looking at the issue, whoops, I didn't want to go forward yet, looking at issues of how to get more trained counselors into the stroke care system. And we partnered with a group, Adler Aphasia Center in New Jersey, and a professor at UNC Chapel Hill to deliver. We've now delivered 2 pilot trainings to a group of mental health professionals about how to work with stroke survivors, and in particular people with aphasia, and how to provide that kind of counseling support. And we're sort of in the middle of what we're calling a listening tour, trying to talk to anyone and everyone who is in the mental health field, and try to understand what they see as opportunities, what they see as barriers, so that we can really be thoughtful about where to put time and energy, and candidly building a cohort of people with whom we can collaborate. So if any of you are or know people who are thinking about this, I know of at least one from this conference, we would love to talk and connect.
The grieving, the chapter 7 is the identity theft is titled Grief. Many years into my recovery, no one told me I was grieving. No one told me I am grieving. I wasn't offered this support to help me grieve. Reading identity theft, we found grief literature really helpful. I was grieving the loss of my old capabilities, grieving the loss of my old life, grieving the loss of my old self. I am grieving these things. But I don't want to suck in the place of grieving. So I try to move forward. I work to rebuild my life. How?
You or me?
How? How?
Oh, we took this one out. Okay.
It is a great year for us. Our sons are going to be married.
So this picture, we were in New York a couple of weekends ago. Up at the head of the table is our oldest son, Danny, who's actually the named co-author on the book with Deb. He was super helpful. and his fiance and her family. We met them for the first time, and he's getting married in July, and our next son is getting married in December. So big year and lots of occasions to go to. And when we went back east, Deb also attended a conference at Harvard Business School, a gender and diversity conference that she's gone to for years. And in a lot of ways, it was okay, I guess I got too close to Deb. That's a problem in relationships, can't do that. That it was just a fantastic week. And yet, on the plane, on the way home, Deb was really down. And that's a dynamic we've experienced in a couple of situations, that the great stuff also is difficult.
I am great, so tired. I am so frustrated. I couldn't engage with everyone like it used to be. I slowed down with my walking, and the week is great, and week makes me grieve. I have to live with conflicting emotions like these for my rest of my life. I was grieving my loss of capabilities. I was grieving my loss of my old life, but I was looking myself forward to rebuild the new life. The life is really enjoy. The life instructs successfully to grow, and therefore the life is consistently put me face to face with my loss.
So a little bit earlier, I guess somebody's controlling the mics. A little bit earlier this year, we posted a column about this on the ASA website because we think this issue of kind of the duality of you want to push yourself as a survivor, and yet pushing yourself will take you back to a place of grieving. And we've come to talk of it as a cycle of grief, and that the goal isn't to avoid those triggers, it's to learn how to manage them. How do you get through that cycle quickly and get back to a constructive place? And this really does speak to the whole idea that this isn't a condition that gets fixed, that gets solved. It's a chronic condition that one's going to live with for their whole lives. And it's not just stroke survivors, and we could go off on how there's just a more need for mental health support in the world at large, but for stroke survivors in particular, this cycle of grief is just something that we think people have to come to expect and get support for managing.
Who am I now? I'm alive. For this, I'm grateful and lucky. Many things have changed. I live with disabilities. My right hand doesn't work. I walk with a limp. My speech is so difficult, really difficult. But the old life is no longer available to me. but many things haven't changed. I cherish the same values, love my same family, work with the same determination. I'm just fulfilling a different kind of career. I have new limits, but I am, again, an active mother, partner, and athlete. I am still rebuilding my identity and rebuilding my life. I hope we can work with you to help others, survivors, do the same. Thank you.
So I think we have time for questions.
Sure. I do have an online question, and it's a three-part question, so I'll read the whole thing first, okay? This is from Lori Bash, who's a guest on Zoom. Thank you so much for your presentation. This is so important while addressing rehab of patients and much appreciated. As a physical therapist assistant, something I found very valuable with many of my patients is having a conversation very early on in regards to addressing the mourning process of their new circumstances, and just acknowledging and grieving their loss, navigating emotions, and that this is a normal part of the process. Also just listening to them while offering hope within that. Deborah, what was most useful to you in your early recovery days from rehab staff and others? And also, how did you get to the place where your identity was a choice, and how long did it take for you to recognize that?
3 years. I am not the 3 years since my stroke. No, 3 years. Yeah.
So I think what Deb's saying is for 3 years after her stroke, she didn't want to think about life as a new identity. Like she said in her presentation, to her, she was the same person. So it was just all about getting back to that set of capabilities. We talked for a long time, and you know, I'm the eternal optimist. We talked about it as, oh, someday we're gonna look back on this and it's gonna be a blip. And that was in some ways denial, but in some ways it was incredibly effective because it was motivating. We tell a quick story. We worked very closely with an occupational therapist in outpatient rehab who was wonderful, and we stayed close to. And when we gave our very first presentation at Stanford after the book came out, we were talking to her and she said, you know, Deb, if I had tried to talk to you about what you're now talking about when we worked together, I would have ended up with a black eye, bloody nose, fat lip, or all three. And she was right, because Deb wasn't ready to hear it then. So I think an early conversation about just that this is an emotional journey, that probably is helpful to everyone. But pushing too much on the issue of rebuilding identity and a new life, you really have to listen to each individual survivor to sort of get a sense of where they are, because pushing that too fast could actually backfire.